is new to the commissioners, and it's the first time that I'm aware that we've had a TND case. So let me kind of go through this, and want to be sure everybody that wants to speak has completed the speaker card and marked whether you wish to speak or not. I will require that everybody is polite and courteous to the other side. I don't want to hear any hollering or screaming or stuff like that, because if I start hearing it, I got 2 deputies here, and they'll be more than happy to escort you out. Just kind of go through what kind of timeline I'm looking at. Mr. Shane, who's the attorney for the Honeybee project, has asked to have 30 minutes, which I've got down. And so he's going to start here in just a minute. And then about 6:45, I'm going to open the floor to the citizens and ask that you try and hold your comments to about 3 minutes. It doesn't look like we've got, a big crowd, but I don't want y'all to run out of time. So I'm going to hold it to 3 minutes to start with. 7:30, I'm going to close the floor to the citizens. So about 7:35, I open the floor to the commissioners, and hopefully we'll be finished by 8 o'clock. So, Mr. Shane?
Good evening.
Good evening.
You good there. Just leave it like that.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, honorable commission members that are here this evening, and certainly members of the public that are participating in this workshop. Because we have a record of this evening, I'll go ahead. For the record, Jeff Shane of the Jones Fussell Law Firm at P.O. Box 1810 in Covington. I represent Honeybee Holdings, LLC, which is a subsidiary of D.R. Horton Gulf Coast. We are the owners of the property and petitioners as it relates to the creation of a TND-2 development. We appreciate the chair providing us an opportunity on the front end of the meeting to present this TND-2 general implementation plan. We realize it's a little unusual maybe for us to take the first 25 minutes or so. To the extent that we can be more brief, we will, but we feel it's important for us to be complete so that we can get the information to you, those that are in the audience, and also those that may be viewing this at home or will view it at a later date. This property, as you know, is a 275-acre tract situated on the north side of U.S. Highway 190 and pretty much bifurcated by Honeybee Road, which is a parish road running north, pretty much in the center of the property. We are all very aware of the attempt by my client to change the zoning of this property to a planned unit development earlier this year, a process that took us not only before you as a zoning commission, but ultimately before the parish council. And we understand that our desire to create, for the most part, a single-family residential PUD was clearly and resoundingly rejected. So for that reason, we have gone back to the drawing board, and we have opted to start the process to develop this tract in what we believe is our right to utilize the TND-2 zoning that was afforded this property in 2010 by the St. Tammany Parish Council as a result of the comprehensive rezoning effort at that time. I think it would be of interest for you to know that we began working on this project in earnest, the TND that is, back in February/March, and we've had numerous meetings with staff as it relates to our thoughts, our ideas, but also to learn the process, because as all of you know, we all believe this to be the first TND-2 application seeking approval of a general implementation plan in the history of our parish since TND-2 was included in the Unified Development Code that was adopted in '09. I would like to briefly talk about the process because I think it will help all of us understand not only what we hope to accomplish this evening, but what we hope to accomplish when we come back to you before public hearing. So as we appreciate the TND-2 ordinance, and I think this is supported by the memo that Director Ross Liner issued to you today, and I saw that there are copies up front for those in the audience. It's essentially a two-step process. The initial filing consists of assembling data and submitting the TND checklist information. We started that process and actually made our filing in mid-March. Because it was the first review by staff, we concurrently agreed with staff that it would not be set for public hearing in May, but rather set for public hearing in June, so that there would be ample time for staff to look at our submission, provide us their thoughts and comments, us make responses and revisions, and to try to, of course, move the project along. So as a result of that, we were prepared to go to public hearing before you as a zoning commission in June. But also, under the code, the director has the prerogative to determine that he does not want to refer the case to the zoning commission until there is a community workshop. The ordinance actually envisioned that. So this workshop of tonight is something the director requested. We're certainly glad to be a part of it, but it's not, I think it's good for everyone to understand that process. The last thing I would say about process is that in our view, the general implementation plan is to create the canvas from which eventually, if a general implementation plan is approved, a specific implementation plan will be painted on that canvas. So by its nature, the first step, the general implementation plan, is conceptual. It doesn't mean it doesn't have some specifics, because it does, as it relates to land use and potential densities. But in terms of the specifics as it relates to this precise location of units, the number of units in a particular sector, and other data, those are things that will be forthcoming with a specific plan. Another thing that I find interesting, but I think will work well, is that the general implementation plan by ordinance comes to you as a zoning commission. The specific implementation plan will go to you as a planning commission. And as a planning commission, you will not only look at the plan, but you will also be asked to review all of the planning and infrastructure metrics and components that you typically look at at a planning commission. Things such as traffic and drainage and sewer and water, and the list goes on. So my point is that it may be frustrating for some, but by the nature of this process, there are some questions that will require detailed answers that will not be forthcoming until the specific implementation plan has been made, has been generated, has been reviewed, has been processed, etc. And we will attempt to go through those elements with you this evening so you'll understand what we have now, where we are now, and where we're prepared to go as the process continues. Last but not least, I would like to at least just briefly identify the team, because we are going to take a team approach this evening. It's not necessary, I think, for me as counsel to lead this discussion as it relates to the TND. You know my face and know my background. Tommy Buckle with Duplantis Design Group is continuing, of course, to be a team member on this project as it relates to all of our engineering needs. But most importantly, Horton recognized that if we were going to develop this property as a TND-2, and particularly in light of the fact that the parish did not have the experience of taking one of these projects through the process, we went out and found what we think and know to be one of the leading firms, planners that is, in the region. And we have brought in the Meta firm, and we have two gentlemen with us this evening, Juan Cerna and Kent Milson, that will present to you a lot of information that hopefully you will find interesting as it relates to TND-2s, our TND-2 ordinance, and then in particular what our general implementation plan is all about. So with those things having been said, I'd like to pass the baton to Meta, our consultants with regard to the TND-2. Juan, I'm assuming you're going to start.
Yeah. Good evening, Commission members. In keeping in the spirit of team effort, both Kent Milson and myself will try to lay out our process and the preliminary vision that we established when we were starting to look at preparing the general implementation plan that we believe adheres to the intent and the spirit of the zone that has already been prepared. Okay. So here on the screen, I'm going to use visuals, so let me know if you're not understanding what I'm pointing to since the cursor isn't working here. So, oh, sorry. So when we first started to look at this, there's two different type of TNDs that you can look at and plan. One is a fresh start, what we would consider as a fresh start, which is kind of in the outskirts of development, and then there's another one which is something that is more traditional in the sense that it's an infill development where it's already surrounded by typically a larger density, densified population area. In this case, kind of the tract, it's everybody kind of is well aware of where it's located. I mean, it's north of 190. Right in the middle of Lacombe and Slidell. But this was important for us to understand not only just the location, but also the size of the project that we were starting to look at, and how that was part of the larger TND zone that was previously developed. So the current zone is roughly, I think, 800 acres or so. The project size that we're looking at is only slightly less than half, almost a third, which is 275 acres. Now, this is clearly not an infill project that is completely separate and different. What we're looking at here is almost a blank canvas. And what we started to do when we're looking at it is looking at inspirations that are relevant to the region, to the spirit of the TND zone, and that have worked well across the country. We looked at several that are, on the East Coast, West Coast, North and South. A lot of times when you're looking at TND developments, you really start to look at scale. Most of the highly successful developments across the country are typically anywhere from 1,000 to 4,000 acres. Now, clearly, that's not what we're looking at here. But that does start to identify the differences between some of those projects. In the larger projects, you have multiple facets of the TND development as part of the master plan community. You have town center, which is kind of a larger, bigger regional development or part of the development that serves the regional needs. That's kind of where you have the big shopping centers, with outdoor entertainment districts. You have major employment centers, major retail centers, high density, almost low rise type of development. Then you have a village center, which is kind of the secondary of the three scales that we look at. That usually serves 1,000 acres, and that would be kind of mid density to high density. But that starts to reduce the need for some of the non-residential uses from large strip malls to kind of big box, junior anchors type of commercial uses, smaller scale employment centers, and multifamily. Then you've got your third level, which is a neighborhood center or village center. It's kind of in the middle of the two. Those tend to serve 200, 300 acres, 400 at the top, and that's usually considered villages. Now those are a little bit trickier to plan because especially when they're the first step of a potentially larger area. Because you need to be cognizant of what you're planning because you really don't have the benefit of the mass density that is usually around a 4,000 acre development or an infill situation. So that is very similar to the situation where we have now. We have to think about a development that is almost self-sustaining, where it's scaled appropriate to the site that we're looking at. That brings us to the next step. When looking at the TND, you've got three major components that you've got to be very mindful of and cognizant of when looking at it to start carving sections out and making sure that they interact cohesively. You've got the residential area, where one of the largest or major staple of the TND is the diversity of housing products. So here, you don't necessarily just have to have single family, and it's better when you have a mixture. So in this case, we wanted to have single family, both detached, attached. We wanted to have multifamily. We wanted to have a combination of the two. In this case, what we're contemplating as some type of live-work situations. And they needed to be scaled appropriately. Again, not just because of its surrounding uses, but also because of the scale of our development here. The secondary is the non-residential uses, in this case what we're calling the village center. It's got to be self-sustaining. In other words, we're not wanting to create a large parking lot with a big box development that struggles to stay afloat because most of the density is either east or west of the site, or just because of the reality of the market and our consumption patterns have changed. But we definitely understand the need for the neighborhood services and the neighborhood uses that come into play, especially when developing a development that is not near some of the larger facilities or regional facilities. When selecting a site and selecting a center for that type of use, that also allows us an opportunity to create a sense of community, something that's a gathering spot, something that we can locate some type of civic use, amenity use that will really draw and create a destination for the residents, but also kind of residents that are coming to visit either their neighbors or their family members and whatnot. And then the next one is, how do you connect the two? It's great if you are able to accomplish one of the two, but it's even better when you can accomplish both and create a system, a network robust enough to create a connection, but also to promote the walkability aspects that a true TND development provides the future residents. In this case, we have a couple things that we wanted to accomplish. One, the central rec facility, amenity center, that would be near and attached to the non-residential uses, in this case, the village center. We'd have multiple neighborhood parks strategically located throughout the neighborhoods, both on the east side of Honeybee and the west side. And then make sure that we had a grid system that promotes the walkability. So in this case, we've got several opportunities with not just roadway systems, but also open space components and servitudes that when planned accordingly would provide a great opportunity for connection.
So go back and live on that page for a second.
want to take over this one?
So to kind of tie, Kim Milson, Senior Planner, Meta Planning Design. Also very visual, so I'm going to point at things and reference things. So if you have any questions, please feel free. Try to tie everything that Juan just kind of laid out there. The key thing to think about with kind of our honeybee TND-2 submittal is the census scale. Like Juan mentioned, a lot of traditional neighborhood developments that occur, in other parts of the country are generally a little bit larger. So whenever we're thinking about, this development, in our discussions and kind of back and forth with staff, we've kind of had to reiterate the fact of don't focus too much on, one pod or one cell of residential or where a multifamily is going to go. We need to think of this as the entire 275 acres, because that's the end of the day, that's how it's going to function. And I mean, our ultimate goal is, get this general implementation to a place everyone's happy with and can, pass muster on everything, move to the specific implementation plan, get lots on the ground, get the kind of core village center developed, and then let this serve as kind of the beacon or the example to kind of prompt and bring out some potential future developments next door in the balance of the TND-2 zone. So trying to tie all that in together, and then I'm going to go kind of piece by piece through some of these major elements of the village center, kind of what those kind of parts and pieces are, how they tie in with some of the housing diversity, to be able to have a lot of different options, be able to reach as many different potential buyers or renters as possible, and then how that all gets tied together into the kind of the walkability is the thread that kind of ties everything together. I'm going to use a slightly different analogy than Jeff. I think kind of when we started looking through this and reviewing the parish's code, that we wanted to make sure that we had the recipe right. And that's kind of how we've looked at kind of this general implementation plan, as well as trying to assemble all the different parts and pieces to our recipe. That way we can present it to yourselves, to the public, as well as to staff, make sure everyone's on board, make sure everyone has a project they can be happy with at the end of the day, before we go too much further and, bake our cake, get to the, specific plans. So a lot of these are going to be general imagery, kind of pretty pictures that we're going to not necessarily emulate 100%, but we're definitely going to try to pick and choose those elements that really bring home what a TND is, a traditional neighborhood development. So at the core of that, both literally and physically, kind of we have that village center. Like Juan mentioned, it's the central hub of the community. We wanted to make sure that no matter any future resident in the neighborhood, in the development, would be no more than a quarter-mile walk from a park, as well as less than a half-mile walk to the village center. And idea there is that's where all our major recreational facilities would be, in the rec center, the amenity center, as well as our civic and commercial components. That way it's never a major hassle to go down to the center of the development, get what you need, or if there's an event, anything of those sorts. So that's trying to tie everything together to be central, and just kind of run through some of the imagery here. Big picture there in the center at the top is Seaside, Florida. Obviously, their central green is iconic to that. But the other parts and pieces that when we were reviewing the parish's code, the regulations, was a strong emphasis on everything being designed to a human scale, as well as making sure the kind of pedestrian realm is put forth and is as important and more so than cars. So you see in majority of these images that you see the building, you see people walking in front of the buildings, around the buildings. You do see some on-street parking in a couple of the images, but I think that helps with that walkability. It's not a giant sea of parking spaces. So with any commercial or civic development we put in here, that's definitely something we're going to keep in mind of people first, not cars. So that's kind of sums up majority of these elements. Just keep in mind on the village center, it'll be the core of the community. It's where all the events will take place. It's where we want the people to be. That's where we want to develop that sense of community around. Speak a little bit on the residential. As Juan mentioned, in the TND-2 zone, we have a plethora of different housing types, whether it's attached, detached, different lot sizes, duplex, townhomes, multifamily, just to be able to provide for as many different people that walk in the door to be able to try to get them into a house, into a place to live in the community. That diversity just helps, one, being able to kind of move through and develop, but be able to provide not the same home buyer. That way you can catch people in their different lifestyles. You can have empty nesters, you can have first home buyers, just the whole gamut that kind of builds into that community, and it's not people all of the same, not background, but you get that diversity of both the housing as well as the future home buyers, future residents. So on the screen you see a few of kind of the renderings that D.R. Horton has in other similar projects throughout the region, as well as some kind of hand-picked examples of different attached product or multifamily components from places like Daybreak or Stapleton, other more TND style developments around the country. And then lastly, just on all these little components, like I said earlier, the thread that kind of ties all these together is the green spaces, the parks, the walkability, which is just paramount to the entirety of the development. We have two great assets in the property itself with Bayou Paquet, and we have a pipeline servitude east of Honeybee that we have every plan to amenitize with trail, other things, benches, definitely landscaping, because we want people out there to walk. In our business, one of the things we've seen come out of the pandemic the last couple of years is trails are one of the biggest things for any community of any size. People want to be out, they want to be walking, whether they're walking a dog, just walking their kids, what have you. So that's paramount in a traditional neighborhood development. That's something we definitely want to put forward. And like Juan said, through the initial layouts of where we are in the general implementation plan, we want to make sure that every home is as connected to each other and to the village center as they can be. Just run through some of the examples up here. I'm going to start in the top right, and that's an example of one of our developments in the Katy area. What we envision that is similar to how we could treat Bayou Paquet. We understand it has some detention necessity, but that doesn't mean we can't put a trail around it, we can't do landscaping, we can't do improvements, one, to be able to use it as an amenity as well as from an engineering standpoint. And then the image just below that one and just to the left, two examples of how in other developments we've used different servitudes or easements to be able to provide different walking trail options. The one in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a pipeline easement runs underneath the west side of the road there between the back of lots and the street there. Big, not regional trail, but project trail to be able to link up to. There's some commercial just kind of north and to the left behind those houses to be able to get that connectivity through. And the other two or three images just kind of show the importance of, even if you're in a multifamily development or any other housing type, being able to stay connected with the trail system throughout all aspects of the development is key. That way, whether you are a renter in an apartment or in a townhome, or you're in one of the houses on kind of the periphery, you all have the equal opportunity to walk down to the rec center, to walk down to the kind of our central plaza, and be able to partake in whatever the community event is for that week or that month, and just to be connected to everything. I don't know if you want to wrap up on parks.
So clearly we try to make it as brief as possible, but one of the big things that I think you heard throughout is the open space component and how kind of that ended up establishing the framework that we have here in front of you. This is probably the best example to use on kind of to illustrate that network system. This is what we're calling the parks plan. Here we have, you can see there's three major facilities, north-south facilities, kind of traversing the site. And then we also have two major east-west facilities that are adjacent to local roadways that we're planning to really connect, every quadrant of this overall development. And here, this also illustrates how that village center is square in the middle. And it's like Kent mentioned, it's 5-minute distance from every corner of this development, which that not only helps give the end buyer and future residents one of the best features of a planned community that they can get, but it also helps alleviate potential traffic issues, because a lot of the local traffic that we tend to create just by going to the convenience store, to the grocery store, whatnot, you start to remove those from the daily metrics. That being said,
Hello, my name is Tommy Buckle. I'm a principal with Duplantis Design Group, and I'm going to give you just kind of a quick brief 3 to 5 minute update on where we stand and some of the components as it relates to this. So the existing property, as you guys know, is outside of the effective FEMA firm areas. It is also outside of the preliminary firm maps. We specifically spent time and effort when we were first approached to search for property that was not in a critical drainage area, that was not burdened by any type of flood zone or floodplain. This imagery also provides that we're also not in a critical drainage area as well. Many of y'all have seen this map from the previous workshops that we had back in the TND. We kind of feel like we have gone above and beyond a little bit as it relates to the parish regulations and codes. In fact, the preliminary drainage impact study was previously approved by staff, and we intend to utilize and actually enhance what we previously brought together. So we looked at 505 acres, all upstream of Highway 190, which drain to basically the 5 to 6 culvert crossing locations that drain underneath Highway 190. There is some residential development that's to the north of us that drain through Bayou Paquet, and the improvements that we're going to do to Bayou Paquet are actually going to help those guys. In addition to that, the additional stormwater storage that we're proposing to put along or within the facility is actually going to increase and enhance the capability of the current drainage system. And one of the things we've talked to staff about, and it's in staff's comments, is that we're willing to produce at the next level a 2D model that could be utilized to add to the existing FEMA-approved model that would actually show that there are going to be flood reduction and benefits throughout the basin of Bayou Paquet due to the fact that we are really at the headwaters of Bayou Paquet, and we have a unique opportunity to be very collaborative in working with the existing drainage system. The other components I want to talk a little bit about is the utility and stormwaters. So one of the things that we previously were providing is our own water and sewer. We have been working with staff. We're going to separate those. We originally had a utility site that was planned in the southeast corner. We are going to move the water well and that feature to more of the civic area, and try to maybe amenitize that with some recommendations that Juan and Colors had. And then the wastewater treatment facility, we would still do our own wastewater treatment facility for this phase of the development, which obviously would be expandable if there was ever anything beyond this. I guess from a traffic component perspective, this plan, as you can see, utilizes a third access connection. So when we went from a traditional neighborhood development to we went from a PUD to a TND development with the additional units that are required based on the different uses. We did have a third access connection. many of you have seen this slide before. The items that are in red are the items that we are currently in the process of going through the DOTD process. So we've advanced that since the last time I've stood in front of the public. We have now submitted Appendix B to DOTD. Appendix B consists of our proposed loads based on our proposed land use and density. But the proposed loads and the level of services that would be achieved with some potential improvements at those intersections. So Appendix B has been submitted to DOT, and we're working through that process. I think that pretty much covers it. So.
That concludes our initial presentation. We don't know what format you wish to follow, but if we are needed to respond to questions from you or the public, we're glad to do so. Otherwise, we'll certainly take all the comments into consideration that we hear this evening, because again, we have a work in process. But thank you for the opportunity.
Jeff, let me ask a question here. Do you want to try and handle these questions from the public one at a time, or do you want to just kind of write them down and then come back with a, you tell me on that.
Well, I'd say whatever the commission's pleasure. We will be glad. What I don't want to do is we've been dominant with the time already for 35 minutes or so, but we also want to be available to provide answers. So if you'd like us to take them on one at a time, we can and will. But maybe as we listen to comments, we will make some notes of things that fall within our arena. And if so, maybe we would have a chance to give just some sort of summary at the end where we would not go through the things we've already talked about, but try to give some specific answers. That sound okay?
All right, that's fine. I'm going to start off, the first card I've got here is Donna McDonald. Good evening.
Good evening, sir. Donna McDonald. I live at 35075 Oak Ridge Avenue in Slidell. Respectfully, I have a couple. Is it possible to ask the engineer a couple of questions, because it relates to what my points are?
Yeah.
Mr. Buckle, which...
Be sure you're speaking into the mic.
Okay, yes, sir. Mr. Buckle, which FEMA regulations were you using? Were you using FEMA 2.0?
It's an insurance rating system. It's not the official
Tommy,
guideline.
Tommy.
I'm sorry. So, RISC 2.0 is a insurance rating system. It is not the official guidelines that St. Tammany Parish has adopted as it relates to determining base flood elevations or not.
Okay.
Yep.
And then it appeared as if the homes were being built as slab on grade. Is that still the intention? Okay. So leading to what, let me back off. I sat on the New Directions 2040 committee. I've sat on the parish's low-hanging fruits committee, and I also virtually attended the FEMA Flood 2.0. And I agree that this is a flood rating system. However, the residents who are going to be buying into this property are going to have to meet the guidelines of the FEMA 2.0 in order to be able to get insurance that they can afford to pay for. Slab on grade homes, according to FEMA 2.0, are considered the highest risk of any building design. They will never be able to take advantages of discounts that the FEMA 2.0 is going to offer. Their appliances cannot be covered. Anything on the first floor cannot be covered. If their kitchen's on the first floor, it cannot be covered. The FEMA representatives begged St. Tammany Parish to not become a Houston and continue to develop in the flood zones. Elevated structures with spaces underneath it will be given discounts. And they will be, although they are more expensive to build, they would be more expensive to buy. But over the long term, it's projected that these people will eventually save money. FEMA also is requiring that the communities utilize the entire watershed assessment, and I would request that that be done on this property also, not just the 500 or 800 acres that they're looking at.
Okay, thank you, Donna. Let's see.
Would you like me to,
Pardon?
address some of those?
Yeah, you
Would it
can,
be easier, would it be easier?
it probably would be easier
Yeah,
to,
so that we don't try to do it.
Yeah.
do it this-
yeah,
No, so look, I think those are some very good points, and I just want to try to address them real quick. So, the purpose of why we would ultimately, do a 2D model submitted to Region 6, to obtain a, certification from them that there are improvements would be to ensure that slab-on-grade homes would not be at a risk, right? The reason, I'm familiar with the RISC 2.0. And the RISC 2.0 assessment basically is indicating that, of course, yes, a raised house in a FEMA flood zoned property, if it's currently in a flood zone or a potential future flood zone, it is actually at high risk. Totally agree, absolutely correct statement. The point that I want to make sure we understand here tonight is that the current property is not in either the current zoning or the future zoning, and to go the extra mile, we are willing to get an updated map post-construction of honeybees, physical improvements, so y'all understand what I'm talking about. We would actually produce a study that would be submitted to FEMA and approved by FEMA prior to construction. Post-construction, we would submit as-built construction documents to FEMA to ensure that the revised flood maps were issued for, yes, this part of the basin as well as the part of the Bayou Paquet basin that is mapped downstream. That's what we're offering to do. So I just wanted to make sure we cleared those things.
okay,
Okay.
all right. Now, Liz,
My name's Elizabeth Teague. I live at 116 Pin Oak Drive in Oak Manor subdivision. And I just wanted to simply go through many of the things that you have already heard with the first presentation from this group. This sounds like Disney World revisited. I mean, when you look at just the plan of the development itself, it is sounding wonderful. But where it is and how it affects the people that have lived around it for years has been more my interest in this project, and was my interest for the years that I did serve on the parish council and police jury prior to. I guess I'm the last person fully elected from this district since that happened. But anyway, again, bringing up some of the same things. It sounds like a laundry list, but they're things that you all need to be thinking of. And that is the density. And we're talking about in there, but how that affects what's around it. The safety, the public roadways that everybody has to take in order to move and get around out in that area. Very serious. Also the drainage. And again, taking a look at 190 and where I live. By the way, I just had my tax bill reduced for my house is now worth $65,000 less because of drainage in the neighborhood. So that means less money for St. Tammany Parish too. And it's because of the continued storms, not a hurricane, but the storms. And so that's something else you're going to have to, I think people will be looking at. Also the idea of developing that many wetlands, again, an issue that you all will have to look at in this process. The other thing I think too that I would bring up is the hospice house that many of you are aware of is in our parish, is located right at the beginning of Oak Manor subdivision. And even right now with the rain, it's all the way up to their back door. And so that is, when you talk about safety and health, that's very serious too. Again, also, the consistency of decisions. I spoke before this group and also the parish council when this came up before, many of the same things have not been changed. So to have a consistency of decision would be very important. I just wanted you all to be aware and think of those things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, Jeff, from your group? Jeff, any comments from y'all? Okay, Bennett Harris? Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
You probably got, there you go.
Good evening. I'm Bennett Harris. I'm speaking for my neighborhood. First of all, this adds insult to injury. To put those type of buildings where we are would definitely flood us more than we are now. Secondly, they say they want to build on this property. I tracked this property through the St. Tammany Parish Assessor's Office, and it shows no owner to that property. And most likely the reason for it is because they need an act of Congress to attain that land. That land, I have a letter from Congress signed by President Hayes, okay, giving these families back there that still have living heirs the property forever. Now, to me, forever means always. It couldn't be sold, it couldn't be taxed because it was a grant, okay? These people come in here with their high-priced lawyers and try to take things. I have the documents on my phone. The documents will be presented to the council, and we need to know how they obtained this land when it couldn't be sold and it couldn't be taken for taxes. And basically, the drainage that they're calling Bayou Paquet is a ditch maybe wide as this podium. Then, on top of that, we pay for fire protection, but we don't have not one fire hydrant on Honeybee Road while these people are going in there with these trucks building. And if somebody's house catch on fire back there, they already burned down before they could put it out because they got to go to Thompson Road to get water. So while they're building this supposed project that they can't produce titles, like I say, I have copies of the letter from Congress. These people, I think, somewhere back in time, used their high-priced lawyers and came in there, started taking the trees that was farmed off of this land from these people for years and years and years before this project even came. They tried it once before in '75, but they couldn't get the land cleared. I'm just wondering how they cleared the land now, and that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bennett. Jeff, any comments at this time?
With all due respect, with both the PUD application and also the most recent TND-2 application, your ordinance requires that we produce evidence of title, which we've done in both instances. The parish has not suggested to the contrary. We bought this property, it's an insured title, and we're confident that we own it. We understand Mr. Harris's concerns about flooding drainage and also his need for better fire protection. And I think as this project develops over time, particularly when we get to the specific implementation plan, we're going to find that we're going to be bringing things to the area that will actually improve both health, safety, welfare, and quality of life for people like the Harris family and others.
Okay. Tom Collins?
Good evening. I'm Tom Collins, 34143 Lowry Lane, Slidell. I noted, I guess it was on the speaker card, a phrase about the purpose of this hearing, whether the land use was appropriate, which got me to thinking of another angle. Appropriate for who? My house was built before George Washington was president, okay? Literally. This is the oldest extant building in St. Tammany Parish. It was built on high ground. It's no longer high ground. A southeast wind in the Mississippi Sound puts water onto my lawn. A project like this is going to take over wetlands, 211 acres, I understand. What do you do about that? That's a sponge for me. That's taking up water that would end up in my yard. What do you do with all of the water that's being taken out of the ground from a well, sent through the plumbing of these homes, and put back, after being purified, into the drainage system? What do you do with that water? That's the water that will be on my lawn. What do you do with the slabs and the concrete that no longer allow water absorption? That's water that'll be on my lawn. And you know, a lawn is not all that important to me, but being able to get in and out of my house is. During the last hurricane, I have video of my wife and I canoeing to where we had parked our cars on high ground a mile away. All of that being said, that's drainage, okay? How about the density? I challenge you to look at Google Maps of any of the Horton developments. We have one along up in Alton, I believe. And we have one out in the Eden Isles general area. What is it, Lakeshore Estates? Yeah. Do a look at the aerial views of these places. We're talking about future slums. One day, when these properties deteriorate, you're left with high density. What does high density give you? New Orleans or any other big city. Are we going to be a big city here? No. We love our rural nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlotte Collins.
I'd like to comment.
Okay.
With all due respect, it's really difficult to have someone suggest that what we are trying to create is going to be a future slum. And I would only respectfully request that if the residents don't like the plan, that's one thing. But to make those kind of suggestions, we're not trying to be adversarial this evening. We're trying to present, listen, and learn. And I ask that we be shown the same respect that we're trying to afford everyone here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Charlotte Collins. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Charlotte Collins, 34143 Lowry Lane, Slidell, 70460. Okay, I'll stand over here. I am very interested in the new TND-2. I think it affords new options for St. Tammany Parish, but I am intensely interested in what that really will be like in the end. It is up to you all, it is up to us, it is up to all of us to be sure this is really going to be something good for our parish and that we toe the line and make sure it's for the better. The thing I'm most concerned about for this development is location, location, location. Out of the 275 acres, 211 is wetlands, and to me that is a bad choice. Our wetlands do a much better job than anything man will ever come up with, and it filters our lands into perpetuity without us doing anything other than protecting it. Whereas all of the man-made things, the tax money that will be required, the maintenance that will be required, the improvements that will be required over time is daunting. It is South of I-12, which we know everything south of I-12 floods. We know it does. Southeast wind, that's all it takes for us on our bayou, which Bayou Paquet flows into Bayou Liberty, which is a natural and scenic waterway. And all of this runoff will go straight into a natural and scenic waterway that thus far, thank you for protecting. We know that our water quality is decreasing in the watershed, the entire watershed. I'm speaking of Lake Pontchartrain. We don't need any more of that. We know that we are considered a sportsman's paradise, and the wildlife that is along the shores of Lake Pontchartrain is at risk. We have the Big Branch Marsh near there. It is not only a marsh, but also a water management area. Wildlife management area. The Corps has been working hard to protect our wetlands. You remember these huge projects to fill back in our wetlands and keep them protecting us. And the one thing that we have learned over and over is how important our wetlands are. Mitigation can go to 16 parishes and 4 counties in Mississippi that does our parish no good. I care about our parish. It is a burden on these heritage homeowners and our taxpayers once their initial part is over. Our increases in insurance, taxes, storms, and flooding are undeniable. The one person that stands to gain from this is the out-of-state developer. And obviously, it is a huge benefit for someone. Our today's economic development is finite. Thank you very much. I hope St. Tammany Parish will be here for generations.
Thank you. Mr. Shane, any comment?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mark Bryan. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Mark Bryan, 31245 Cypress Street, Lacombe, Louisiana. To Donna's point regarding the insurers, I don't know if you're aware, I've just recently had to renew my insurance. There are 12 property owners insurance companies that have gone out of business or withdrawn from Louisiana effective last month. Interstate 12 is a trigger for insurance rates post-Katrina. It's very difficult to get insurance south of I-12 in this area. So that was just something to add to Donna's comments earlier about insurance rates. I've got a question. So what is a traditional neighborhood district? What is it? We don't have one here. A traditional neighborhood district is intended to be a community that is self-sufficient, okay? From the code, TND-2 district diversifies and integrates land uses within close proximity to each other. It provides for the daily recreational and shopping needs of the residents. Daily recreational and shopping needs of the residents. And also many other opportunities if you dive into this. It's already zoned TND-2. The developer can develop it as a TND-2. 275 acres, one tract. An additional tract to the east is TND-2. An additional tract to the south is TND-2. So, how is it developed? Do we adhere to the intent of a traditional neighborhood district, which is to build a community that is self-sufficient to where it does not load the existing traffic and sewer and whatever infrastructure that already exists for the residents in that area? It's supposed to be almost self-sufficient. The intent being people live there, they work there, they play there. They don't have to leave to go to work necessarily, to go get a gallon of milk, to go play. They stay there. Okay. So, what's proposed is 1,573 units divided equally between single-family and multifamily homes. There is no minimum density specified in the code. Okay. Just rough numbers, taking the original proposal A4A PUD, and the number of homes and multiplying the traffic, this could potentially contribute 13,353 vehicle trips a day to 190 as proposed. And there's 1.5 acres of civic space dedicated as proposed and 1.5 acres of commercial as proposed. 10,000 square feet of commercial space, which is roughly equivalent to a Dollar General and a Starbucks for 1,573 homes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Shane, any comments?
So actually, the village center consists of about 18 acres that can be utilized in various components. Also, we tried to suggest earlier that the TND is a matter of scale, and we tried to do a good job of distinguishing, although that there are certain self-sufficient aspects of the community that we propose. It will include, for example, a retail component of 10,000 square feet that will have multiple uses within it, such as restaurants, cleaners, perhaps some types of dry goods sales, things of that nature, things that will provide services to the people. We also understand, though, that this TND will have impacts on the immediate vicinity, but your code measures those impacts as it relates to drainage, as it relates to traffic and other aspects. So we understand that it's our job to make sure that the village that we create not only has sustainability, but also has compatibility with the surrounding area.
Thank you, Mr. Shane. Bob Bosenberg?
Good evening, gentlemen. Good evening,
Good
panel.
evening, sir.
My name is Bob Bosenberg. I live at 30952 Old Todd Road here in Lacombe. Pardon me, I have a frog in my throat. Lacombe traces its history almost 200 years back to Native American Choctaw and French overlay by the influence since then. That, I think, is something that may have been lost or should not be lost as we proceed forward with looking at the various attributes of this proposed subdivision. A TND is intended to mimic the ambiance and culture and rhythms and history of the area within which it's sited. Lacombe, as I pointed out, is already reflective of that kind of situation. I contend that the proposal the gentleman presented tonight is an aberrant departure from that. I will be very interested to find out how they tend and to somehow integrate the history, the ambiance of a small town, rural community like Lacombe into their high-density, super high-density development without being aberrant for the surrounding area. The surrounding area itself is nothing more than, excuse me, is nothing more than large lot residential that already is suffering, as the ladies have said, from already flooding, which is a function of where we happen to live. So again, I would be interested to see how the developer would propose to deal with some of those other infrastructure problems, such as drainage, school systems, so forth and so on. Not just in the site, but take a broader view and look within the footprint of the watershed. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Shane, any comments?
No, sir.
Last name's Clements. Bonner? Bonnie. Bonnie? Okay.
Hi, Bonnie Clements, 34020 Doobie Pinner Road, 70460. I think they painted a very pretty picture, but I noticed that only the last gentleman brought up the density, 1,500 homes, the mixed use. I'm personally concerned that the demand is not there. You have a developer that comes in and starts doing site development You don't have the sails. You've put concrete where water wants to go. It's going to increase, as others have said, flooding around the area. I'm only seeing two ways in. Maybe I'm missing something, but they're both off of 190, and that's already crowded. We know that. And then the final thing is, it is a creek, Bayou Paquet. I'm going to urge you not to look at this myopically. These waterways all do run into each other. You mess around with one, you're impacting all of them. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Shane, any comments?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Don Weiss.
Donald Weiss, 62001 North Point in Briar Lake.
Good evening.
I've been around Lacombe all my life. I've been living here full-time for about the last 44 years. And the reason I'm here is because it's a nice, quiet place to live. My subdivision houses are 1 acre, and it works out just fine. I just can't imagine bringing that many people in. Their first proposal was for 1,000 homes. It was soundly defeated. Now we're looking for 1,500 residents in the same square footage. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Hopefully, we're going to have several more hearings, and I kind of felt left out because y'all planned all of this and didn't ask us anything. Nobody called me to see what my thoughts were or anything else, or how we should develop something on that property. But they talk like, oh, we all got together.
That's the reason for
and
this
decided.
meeting, and it was advertised so that people could comment back to the development department.
Well, I've been watching like crazy, and I didn't get anything. So.
Okay,
Anyway, thank you.
thank you. Mr. Shane?
Yeah, I hope, again, that, as I said earlier, we are listening to all the comments that are made this evening, and that will help guide us as we will continue to work on this plan. So the way the process works is the landowner starts by making a proposal. The director determined that we needed a public workshop in large part for our presentation, but maybe more importantly to hear from the people. So I can assure you, we're taking every note that of every comment that's made.
Thank you. David L. Zaba? Lee? Yeah, do you wish to speak?
Yes. Lee Domingue, 34057 Bayou Liberty Road. Thank you for hearing us tonight. I would like to address something that Mr. Tom Buckle said, only because I do respect his comments, but I wanted to make sure that we all understood precisely what FEMA 2.0 demands. And it's very explicit when you read the documents provided by FEMA. All new structures will have their premiums determined at the full risk rate. No discounts. No beneficial flood zone X. All flood zones will be eliminated in consideration for flood insurance with FEMA 2.0. There is a statement in there that says very clearly, any new structure within 1,000 yards of a stream, bayou, river, lake, or any natural waterway will be dealt with accordingly. It says, once again, 2.0, slab-on-grade homes will be the highest risk and will have premiums determined accordingly. They will not be able to benefit from any associated discounts. Further, those homes which are elevated will be able to receive discounts of up to 30%. The point is, not very many people know all these things. It was told by FEMA representatives at a meeting last month. It's important for us to understand slab-on-grade homes going forward is a mistake in St. Tammany Parish, particularly south of I-12. And by the way, let's talk about that for a second. I just wanted you to be aware, 275 acres, 211 acres, or wetlands, you've heard this before.
I'm not sure what you would call sensitive, what defines that. You know, obviously in days gone by, we said critical drainage areas, flood zone areas were sensitive. But I dare say, if you have a parcel that's 77% wetlands, that might be considered sensitive. Property that's south of I-12 should be considered sensitive because it actually floods often. It floods people in the area. It floods people downstream. It's important to recognize these things. Be aware that all the developed property in the vicinity around this parcel actually is A2, 1 house per acre. Why would we put something as densely developed as this plot plan in the middle of a section that's, for the most part, A2? And by the way, look, I'm not against TND-2s or 1s. I think the concept is intriguing and probably interesting enough that we should explore it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I've got one card left for Judy Rawls.
May I do that, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, we can do that.
We were talking about sensitive property, which once again, I think should be considered. And TNDs are a option in St. Tammany Parish only because certain properties have been zoned there. This is our first opportunity to do a TND, and let's make sure that we do it right. Let's make sure that St. Tammany doesn't go down the path that unfortunately we did with PUDs, planned unit developments. Now we're regretting what really happened. We need to make sure that a traditional neighborhood development is exactly that. It is a mini municipality. What it does, it provides amenities on site in the subdivision that allows those residents, those people who buy into this project, the ability to shop, to go to gas stations, to do banking, to go to hardware stores, restaurants. And what that does, it gives them the opportunity to do other types of modes of transportation, walking, bicycling, even mass transit. It keeps the people who are working, playing, and living on the property in the subdivision, for the most part, within it, so that the impact of additional traffic on a not a poorly, but on a 2-lane Highway 190, which is already overburdened, minimized. Now, 1,500 units on this property is absurd. We really need to understand that. Every house around there that's built in multiple subdivisions is 1 house per acre. If we allow this to go forward as it is, what's going to happen to this property is that they're going to clear cut, they're going to fill, they're going to cover the whole area with impervious land surfaces, eliminating the property's natural capacity to both filter and absorb water. That water will ultimately have to go downstream. It's going to flood other properties. We need to be very cognizant that we have an opportunity as the appointed officials and the elected officials of St. Tammany Parish to do this right. We can build a TND or make the developer construct a TND that is a model of TNDs going forward in Louisiana and even in counties outside the state. But we have to make sure that we do that. Understand also, the ordinance is not well drafted. We all recognize that for TNDs, any more than PUDs. But the black and white and what it's actually stated in the ordinance doesn't mean we have to adhere to that. There is a concept, there's a spirit and an intent of a TND which goes way beyond the wording. Explicit wording doesn't encompass that. We must make sure that St. Tammany does. Thank you again.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Shane, you got any comments right now?
Yeah, just a moment.
Did you fill out a card? All right. Okay. Oh, that's the,
I just want to add one more thing. Bennett Harris again. just want to add one more thing. Okay, down on Airport Road, there's a mall. It's closed down. Why would they want to bring something like that in our neighborhood when people wouldn't even support the mall on Airport Road? What makes these people think that they would support a neighborhood development and the people don't want it? You know, the people back there, the people in every neighborhood around us do not want it. They want this land to stay open land, which, as I said, these people say they have title to the land, but I also have people that have deeds to that property, and that will be taken up in court at a later date. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shane?
We don't have any specific comments to make unless there's questions from the commissioners. We think
Hadn't
that...
got to that yet.
Yes, sir, I realize that. So, I mean, I think maybe we will just listen and participate, and if you have questions, we'll be glad to address them. Otherwise, we intend to take this data and continue to work on our project.
Okay. I have a number of cards here where the people wish not to speak. And before we get any further, I'm going to call the names off, and if you've changed your mind, now's the time to speak. Alma Young, William Scott, Darrell Cannon, Gail Demers, Bonnie Cannon, and Donald Morgan. Okay. All right. With that being done, I'm going to close it to the public and bring it back to the commission. So commissioners, if you have comments, Paul?
Yeah, Jeff. What, you mentioned the live-work units. What is that exactly?
That'll be in the commercial component of the village center, where we envision a concept where there will be opportunities to have, I guess, what we will call neighborhood businesses, but also have residential quarters on a second floor above. In some case, it could be a shop owner that has his residence above. Okay. In other instances, it might be those that want to live sort of in the village area. But I guess in many respects similar to what we see in certain areas of Slidell, but certainly I think of Boston Street and some of the other streets in Covington where we have residential quarters above the commercial establishments.
Okay. And other question is, multifamily was mentioned. What does that mean? Does it mean apartments are allowed?
Yes. If you look at the use plan, you will see that we envision townhomes, duplexes, and then also traditional apartments, which are designated on the site. So there will be combinations of multifamily products on the site.
So the percentages of each type of unit hasn't been determined yet, right? Is that?
No, but I would say that we have suggested on this general implementation plan a max number of, I believe it's 780.
I think that's correct. Somewhere in the 875 to 880.
878 or 875 single family and just a few less for the. For the multifamily. It comes to a total of about 1,550.
Okay.
And this is consistent with when we presented the PUD and we used the constant contrast. At that time, we believed that the TND would support approximately 1,700 units. That's the number I used then.
Okay.
When we got to looking at it, we think it will be something less than that.
Okay. Regarding what's allowed in this TND-2, I think I have a copy of the ordinance here, but does it say that multifamily is allowed? Does it say that live-work units are allowed, or what?
Yes, sir. Well, we have been working with
explicit
staff. The ordinance clearly allows multifamily. In fact, it requires multifamily.
Okay.
It does not allow the TND to be all single-family residential. It does say that the multifamily cannot exceed the single-family residential.
Okay.
And so, it does allow, it encourages the variety, the types, whether it's single-family or multifamily.
All right. The last question, the traffic impact analysis. At what stage will that be submitted?
Okay.
Because,
Sure.
like you said, it's a multi-step process. You have
Yes,
the
sir.
general implementation plan, then you have a specific implementation plan, and
Right.
you could have a preliminary plat submitted concurrently with the specific implementation plan, and I'm just trying to figure out where
Sure. Well,
that fits into the process.
I appreciate the question, and I'll try to be very specific. So the conceptual traffic plan was approved by the parish engineering department in connection with the PUD. When we designed the TND-2 general implementation plan, we had to modify that traffic plan or study, if you will, because obviously we have different types of uses, different access points, more units, greater density, et cetera. That conceptual plan has also been approved by the parish engineering department.
Okay.
Conceptual. The specific study will include, of course, the specific number of units and types of units that we
Sure.
ultimately do in the specific plan. And of course, I guess the big brother in this project is certainly LADOTD, because all of our traffic flows onto 190, controlled by the state. And so right now, that Appendix B reference that Tommy talked about earlier is a stage or level of submission to DOTD where they have the counts, they understand the configuration of the development, the types of uses, the number of trips, et cetera, and they're studying that now based on how we intend to lay out the traffic pattern.
Okay.
So we await response from them, and that will certainly probably be another 3 or 4 month process. But it is not one that, in our view, is needed to be completed for the general plan. It is clearly something that you as a planning commission would require as it relates to consideration of a specific implementation plan.
Okay. And at what phase would construction start? That would be after the specific plan is approved, along
After
with the
the
final traffic study and drainage study?
And wetlands approval.
Wetlands approval also?
And sewer and water design and approval by the appropriate state agencies, et cetera. So there's certainly a lot of balls in the air, and there would be no shovel in the ground till all appropriate agencies have approved and issued permits.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, any other commissioners wish to speak? Ron,
Well, just a few questions. Mr. Shane.
turn your mic on.
Yes, sir.
The TND-2, the TND, as I appreciate the ordinance or the information that we received, it's to be developed in such a way that will be, quote, self-sustaining, right? Basically.
I guess beauty's in the eyes of the beholder. Yes, there's definitely a self-sustaining element to it, but to suggest that it would be a mini municipality, I think, as Dr. Domingue mentioned earlier this evening, or one of the speakers, I mean, I don't think that a village concept TND on 275 acres pursuant to our ordinance is suggestive that all of the components needed for the residents is located within the TND.
Okay.
So, yes, the opportunities, though, to have civic uses, the opportunity to have commercial uses, except, yes, they have to be present and they've got to be real. And that's why we plan things such as certain types of, whether it's food outlets for people to get prepared food, perhaps a small grocery where people could in fact buy groceries, perhaps something like a cleaners, perhaps an urgent care, a variety of things that would at least provide some nucleus, not only to sustain those folks, but also to provide opportunities for people in the region beyond our TND-2 to come to this location and partake.
Another question is, and thank you for that, highways, and we talked about traffic. Should this development also have opportunities for traffic to be facilitated or accommodated by surrounding highways and roadways? How would that work for a development in this area with just Highway 190?
Okay, I'm gonna take a stab at it. I'm gonna let Tommy or Juan help me, but I mean, if you're not referring to the roads within the development.
No, sir.
But the roads around it.
Around.
So the slide that we showed earlier indicates that in doing a project, the scope of the traffic study is determined by both the state, and there's also some local input by your parish staff. And it requires an examination of roads in the area, intersections in the area that are going to be directly impacted by the 1,500 units of honeybee. And ultimately, the ability to build this project will depend on DOTD's determination as to not only what improvements we make within our development, or the $1 million roundabout that we build where Honeybee Road intersects US 190, but there may be other requirements of mitigation, road widening, signalization, other forms, stacking lanes, turning lanes, etc. Again, not only directly at our site, but in other areas as well. And those were some of, if I remember correctly, those were some of the red and blue areas that we saw noted on the map. You guys have anything else?
No, I mean, I guess the only thing to offer is the fact that, you know, as you can see on the screen up here, I thought when your initial question was talking about interconnectivity, because that's one of the things about urban planning and smart planning to reduce, you know, traffic congestions for years and years and years. This parish has been developed where everybody runs out onto the same highway, which is really an inefficient way to grid transportation and traffic networks. So we are proposing and would propose, you know, from a development perspective, the ability to interconnect at points to other areas, whether they develop as a TND, whether they develop as an A2, whether they develop as whatever they develop as, right? So that you start to provide that framework and that grid system in order to address the long-term transportation needs that you've identified. You know, we're trying to take some initial steps, right, with some significant improvements to the public infrastructure to the tune of $12 to $14 million is what we originally were looking at, and that hasn't changed. If anything, it's gone up. But the perspective of you know, smart development and planning, yes, we're not trying to plan this in a bubble, right? There's got to be some thought to what it looks like on the periphery.
Okay. And while you're up there, Tommy, this 275-acre tract, of which, if this information is correct, numbers are correct, you have 211 acres of area that's considered wet.
Yeah, it was classified by the Corps as mixed wet. Yes.
Okay. I recall, and I'm gonna tell my age. Prior to Interstate 10, Slidell was full of marsh, and they pumped this water out of the marsh for years. How would, and for the life of me, I'm not an engineer, but it happened. So,
Sure.
How will we be able to saturate that land if it's 211 areas spotted or not? How would we develop that, you know, and where would that water go?
So quite simply, and I'm gonna give you a short answer and a long answer. Our drainage impact study takes into consideration the fact that there are jurisdictional wetlands, and the fact, and the pre-developed runoff numbers that are developed in that drainage impact study take into account ponding and swamping factors. So it's accounted for in the drainage, hence the reason you have 30+ some odd acres of stormwater management on this property, right? Which is 11 to 12%, I don't remember the exact numbers, of the total land area. Okay, so a significant portion. That's the short, easy answer. The other component, well, that's the easy answer, because it's easy for that aspect in my mind is already accounted for, and your technical staff has reviewed and approved it, right? You've had other engineers that understand all of this stuff and deal with this every day that they've reviewed and approved it. So that's the easy answer. The other component, the other part of this is that when you talk about wetlands, there can be wetlands that exist at elevation 100, right? I.e. the Nature Conservancy has property up in north of 25 that has elevations that range from 60 on up to north of 100, and you can have jurisdictional wetlands up there, right? You can also have jurisdictional wetlands in a marsh that's at elevation 2, okay? There's a wide range of what the Corps will take as jurisdictional. Are both of those the same? No, they're not. Right? There's a different quality and a component to both, whether it's coastal wetlands or whether it's jurisdictional wetlands that have been classified based on the fact that this has been land that has been in timber pine production for decades, okay? And when they go through that activity creates wetlands after they agriculturally farm farm it off of there with the rutting and the other contaminants. Hence the reason the Corps classified it as a mixed wet. It's a low quality to them. Typically, they will permit those things, right? You can go through the permitting process, the 404 process, which is federal regulations that allow you to go through that process. So, to answer your question full circle, has the drainage and the absorption been taken into consideration? Yes, it has. It's been submitted to your parish staff. They have acknowledged it, and we're willing to continue to go through those steps and processes, right, as we go forward. And likewise, as it relates to the jurisdictional component, we will continue to pursue through the Corps of Engineers a 404 permit and to permit and mitigate the mixed marginal wet that they have classified on this piece of property. So.
Okay. Thank you, Tommy. Appreciate that. Mr. Shane? And to the chair, I don't know if any other commissioner have anything else to say, but I just want to commend the parish as well as your team, Meta, and the neighbors for coming to listen, to establish some type of dialogue, question and answer, and take home and do some more study and research to bring back answers, if not tonight. I really appreciate that, and thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Kirk, you have some comments?
Yes, sir. Mr. Shane. I have just some oddball questions here. Earlier, I think it was Tommy was mentioning about the water system, going to move the sewerage system away from the water system.
Correct.
And the water system, if I remember correct, I might have heard wrong, so, forgive me, that it will be constructed where it can possibly handle an expansion if needed.
Yes, sir.
Are there any expansion plans on the book right now? Because if I remember also one of the pictures you showed here, there was a large area of ground on the south side of 190 and to the east that was, according to it, a TND. Are there any plans right now that are in the works or considered to expand this TND in any way?
I think I've gotten that question from you before.
Well, I'm asking again.
No, sir, I respect that. But so that the record's clear, we have absolutely no contracts, no agreements, no memorandum of understanding, no handshakes, no wink of the eye, no anything as it relates to buying one more square inch of property to supplement this TND.
Well, that was not just for me, but it was also for the
Yes, sir.
folks out there.
And I understand that we're going to be held to the measure if that's not the case, but that is the case, because that has been brought up in the past, and this is the full extent of our development and ownership.
Okay, and in your plans for the TND, your folks are also cognizant that the bayou and the pipeline are not considered green space, right?
Yes, sir. In fact, we have a 20% green space requirement with the TND-2, and staff has already reviewed our green space calculation, and in certain instances, we've had to make adjustments because we had included certain areas that we felt did in fact qualify, but staff disagreed, so we excluded those areas from the calculation, and we still handsomely meet and exceed the green space requirements.
Okay, next question. Since this is supposed to have small little businesses, mom and pop things or something like that,
You said no mom and pop?
No, mom and pop.
Oh, yeah, yes, sir, correct.
Do you build the building in hopes that somebody will come in and use it, or do you go out and find a business to build it to what they need?
A little bit of both, in that we will likely build the commercial sector, and it will be available to have bays or units of different size, depending on the arrangements that we make for the commercial that comes in. We certainly will know who we hope to have come in, and we will likely build to suit, meaning we will build out those units. So it's not going to be a spec venture.
Right.
Because we recognize that it's not only part of the ordinance, but in order for our community to be successful, it needs to have working components within the TND to make the sales, but to make people happy, to make them reasonably satisfied to live there. So the answer to the question would be is that we will identify the commercial that we hope to bring in. We'll probably build the shell of that building. It'll be one construction, but it could be that that shell will be filled in incrementally. And of course, as you can imagine, you're going to have a certain amount of rooftops actually occupied in order to sustain the commercial. How can someone run a business if the only thing you have going on out there is the construction of homes?
So when you build these future commercial things, is that going to be considered as part of your central commercial thing if you put an apartment above it, or is that going to be considered part of the residential if you put the residential on top of the commercial?
Sure. Well, it's located, I'm going to look to Juan and have him come up with me. It is located in the village center area, is what you're talking about, like the work-live sector. But those units, those residential units, are in fact a part of our residential count. So they're not in addition to, if that's where the question was going.
Right.
They will need to be accounted and classified as either single-family or multifamily.
Okay, and then even though there's a commercial business below it, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we can actually have larger or greater amount of commercial businesses in there. How am I trying to put this? That aren't part of the commercial center. Is that correct?
Correct. I think the best way to simplify it or to explain it is we're capping the amount of residential units. We're not capping the amount of commercial square footage. Because the commercial, it comes after the fact. Until we get a little bit better understanding of what's actually on the specific plan, then we'll size it accordingly to fit the needs and the self-sustaining aspect of the residents.
Okay, and it's going to be larger than 10,000 square feet total, right?
Correct. I think that was primarily one use that we were identifying.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, Neil?
We'll have to forgive me. I got notes all over 3 pages, and I'm going to ramble quite a bit. I'm mainly just going to identify
just some thoughts and concerns I have. I really like the idea of a TND neighborhood. Well, let me back up. For one thing, I was curious about this meeting being called a workshop, because I've been to community meetings, but I have not been to a quote workshop.
This is the first one.
But I feel like it's very similar to a community meeting. I'm a map person. Where are my maps? I got very little detail. I've got some slides that don't stick up long enough and you move on. I would think another workshop when you have more detail. Did I miss a handout or something?
No, ma'am. I brought my own.
It seems like when you had just a simple residential zoning request, I had a lot more maps than a workshop. So that's one comment.
Would you like me to respond to that?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you have your staff report from October, from.
I did not dig it back up.
No, the staff report from July. Hopefully you're aware that there's a 5-page plan at the end of your staff report. It's a public document.
Well, I didn't bring it because I thought there'd be handouts.
I understand, but the suggestion that it hasn't been provided or it's not available, and to the extent that there's anything that we've provided tonight, we are more than happy to provide it in hard copy or electronic form, whatever. We want everybody to have the information.
I just remember a single layout
Yes,
from
ma'am.
that. I
Take a look
don't
at
remember very detailed maps on hydrology or traffic or,
Wait a minute.
or anything.
Well, and it's because hydrology and traffic are not issues of the day as it relates to the general implementation plan at this juncture. If you look at the staff report that staff provided you, the director made a recommendation that we go to a public workshop. My point was only simply that there were 5 pages of our plan that were part of that staff report, and we'll be glad to make all of these slides available to all of the public for good reasons.
Are these the 5 pages?
This is what's part of the staff report.
Mm-hmm. Hold up.
Just a minute, please.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stick with my comment, and I appreciate that, and I should have done more homework on my end. But I think, having posters on walls that people can see, I just didn't feel like it was a working meeting. It was, we're going to say what we think, you're going to say what you think. Yes, there's a little more dialogue back and forth.
Let me stop you right there. This is the beginning of a TND, okay? And a lot of the input that we've got from the public, Jeff and the Meta Group is going to have to integrate that into their plan. This is a long way from.
But then it comes to the commission. That's the next move.
Yes, it should, and I've got August the 2nd down for the next zoning commission meeting, but I'm not sure staff's going to be ready, and I'm not sure that Horton's going to be ready to go forward with it. It may be postponed, okay? So, just because we're having this working session, I understand what you're saying, but there's still a lot of things to be done in the planning process before we ever really get to the hard part of it, okay?
Sure, I understand what you're saying. I'll move on because we're running out of time.
Well, if I could, just to help everyone, it has occurred to us tonight as we are speaking amongst ourselves that we would like to make sure that this matter does not go to public hearing at the August meeting. because we've gotten enough comments this evening, and we're only 2 weeks from tonight, and it would be very difficult, I think, for us to do a better job or do whatever we're going to do. So it's not my place to suggest what this commission does when the case comes in August, but I think it's very likely that we're going to request that you postpone it till September so that we can put together the next generation.
Very good. Some thoughts on just a quick comment on trails and the connectivity, fabulous, but trails that are in full-blown hot sun don't get used nearly as much. If you cut all the trees, you put the trails on a levee around a dead body of water, which is these ponds, then I don't see it in a lot of neighborhoods. Maybe they would come out at dawn or go at dusk, and I'm not there, I don't see it. But I just want to throw that in. Regarding Bayou Paquet, and I know this is not required by the Corps. This district of the Corps, the New Orleans district, does not require stream mitigation. But if you were in a district that required stream mitigation, they may want you to restore Bayou Paquet back to its natural meandering form that it had before, I don't know when it was dredged, but that to me would help the hydrology, help particularly the downstream hydrology, and the green space floodplain around Bayou Paquet could be a wonderful thing to use in your green space and recreation area. But I know that's a big ask. As far as the drainage plan, I actually reviewed the conceptual drainage plan, Tommy, months ago when this project first came across our desk, and had some questions. Is there consideration for, do you integrate the Weather Service data on climate? It said something about NRCS data. Is that, am I not understanding that, or am I getting too detailed and maybe I just need to talk directly to you? Okay.
Maybe offline discussion, but then when we come back for another public workshop or public hearing, we want all of that discussion to then be available to all of the public.
Sure.
Because I don't think tonight we were prepared to go into our conceptual drainage study in great detail.
Okay. Again, at the beginning of my comments, I just said, maybe I just want to throw out some thoughts, not necessarily have them answered or addressed, but these are some thoughts that come to mind. Again, with FEMA, hearing that FEMA in the 2.0 risk meeting was asking St. Tammany to not become Houston. One thing that I think we should do more of, particularly you're south of I-12, you're much more than 50% wetland, is to consider planning for the 500-year storm event, rain event, versus the 100 that's required. As we know, we've had 3 500-year events in St. Tammany in the last 4 years. And another question I have is in the hydrologic study, does it take into account when we have a strong southeast wind or when we have storm surge? And Bayou Paquet can't even drain into Bayou Liberty because Bayou Liberty can't drain into the lake. And we're not talking miles to the south. This is pretty close to the lakefront. So I would think these things would be very valuable. Y'all bear with me a minute. I'm a little concerned that the community area of this 275 acres is only 18 acres. And that seems a very small percentage. Now, looking at your initial comments from the Meta group, that a TND is typically 4,000 acres or more. It begs the question, can you even do a TND with the purpose of our code on 275 acres? Is it even possible? I question that. Are we trying to, and I will admit, at the zoning, I said this should be a TND. This should not be a regular subdivision. But now that I better understand the purpose of TND and that it's typically a bigger size, I will say, I don't know if you've ever been to Kingwood, Texas.
May I correct that real quick?
Can I just finish that? It's a I don't know if it's a traditional T&D, but it's a great community where you have trails connecting the whole community. And, but it's huge. It is its own community. So go ahead.
Yes, just want to make sure I clarified, and just in case anybody misunderstood what I said. So when I talked about 4,000 acres, that was a couple of the examples of master plan communities overall that included a TND component. It wasn't just the TND aspect of it. It was the overall community that, you know, multiple villages, 30-year lifespans to develop, you know, hundreds of thousands of residents. That's not the TND that we were talking about. We were just analyzing the TND component itself, which range in different sizes. In the case of a 4,000 acre community like a Kingwood or like the Woodlands towns that have a town center, those are a little bit larger, that serve larger communities that have larger regional needs. So that kind of ties into the self-sustaining aspects. So in a 4,000 acre development master plan community, the town center itself, or the TND component itself, is larger because it is actually serving what will eventually become a municipality. In this case, we're just talking a smaller scale TND development, which is why the village component is smaller and adequate to the scale of this development.
But do you feel it can meet the purpose as defined in our code?
Yes. So because the code, when it says self-sustaining, the aspect of that is that it's relevant to the size and scale and proportionality of the development itself. In other words,
I don't see that in the text.
well, that's what in planning terms, the self-sustaining means. It's not necessarily solar, or green energy, or anything like that. It's more of a land use component. In other words, it wouldn't be smart planning to put a Walmart in the middle of a neighborhood because of the traffic demands. You don't have the residential unit count to sustain that type of development. So what's adequate is a small mom and pop grocery store, a convenience store, you know, that type of use.
I was thinking, I know when we talked about it at the zoning meeting, that to reduce trips to town, that this site is so far from development that you need a grocery store. You need, some of those essentials to reduce these trips to town. Is that potential in this type of current design that you have? And I'm not talking about a huge store, but.
Yeah, we weren't prepared to go into specifics of the trips, because that's to come at a later date with the specific plan. But how it impacts the general implementation plan, a lot of a goal of the TND development is to reduce what you would call the non-employment traffic, right?
Mhm.
So in essence, you only have to leave your community, your neighborhood, your immediate neighborhood to go to work, because it is very difficult to create a large enough employment center that every person of every different career path would be able to live and work in this one spot, especially with something this size. But what would be removed is the trip that the parents would take just to go to your local park, the trip to go to the corner store, the trip to go to your professional services like the dentist in the afternoon or the weekend or things like that, because those are the components that we're trying to incorporate into the plan itself.
Okay. And you said self-sustaining has its own definition in planning world.
That's just kind of what when you say it's a self-sustained community.
Oh, but I can't get our planning staff to give me the definition.
Well, that's kind of what it's a practice, I guess.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is we're looking at 275 acres, which can be kind of that first puzzle piece for the greater, 850 some odd acres that are zoned TND-2 here on US 190. So yes, as we've heard through the public and your own comments along with the other commissioners, that self-sustaining is a core tenet of what a TND is or what it needs to be. But we're not developing all of what's out here to be a TND or what's zoned a TND. So there is a high likelihood or high potential once rooftops get in here and there is a high enough need, someone could come develop on that balance of that 500 acres and do a small grocery store, do a lot of these other elements that support the community we've started and kind of build a stronger community of, those other parcels that are around us.
Okay, sure. We just don't know if that's speculative, but I understand. I think that's it for me.
Chris? You have some mic on?
So you had to come, Mr. Shane, you had to come in front of the zoning commission. So this is Chris Smale, Planning and Zoning Commissioner. To get the zoning changed from a TND-2 traditional neighborhood development to a TND-2 planned traditional neighborhood development?
If I said that, I misspoke.
Well, it's on the paperwork. So
it might be the nomenclature, but this is not a change of zone case in my view.
Why is it in front of zoning then?
I don't make the staff report or the nomenclature. I would only suggest to you that the property is zoned TND-2, and through the general implementation plan approval process, you acquire the adjective of planned to be added to the district. In fact, I'm sure you've read the ordinance says that once the general implementation plan is approved, that the zoning ordinance is to be amended, if you will, or the map, to show that it's a planned TND-2. But it's not a change of zoning case.
It's not a change in zoning, okay.
In my view.
If I could
Maybe Ms.
explain
Couvillon.
it, yeah. It's currently zoned as a TND concept, and so we're now at the general implementation plan, which will have to come to the zoning commission. The zoning commission will review that general implementation plan, and it has to give a recommendation to the parish council. It can approve the general implementation plan, it can approve it with conditions, or it can deny it. The council then has to take up the general implementation plan regardless of what the zoning commission does. And the council can then approve it with conditions, or deny it. If the council approves it or approves it with conditions, and those conditions are accepted by the developer and made part of the plan, then it becomes a TND planned development. And that is reflected on the zoning map, and that zoning will then stay with that property regardless if it's owned by a different owner in the future. They would be required to abide by the general implementation plan approved by the parish council.
Thank you.
Does it then have to go to planning commission?
If the general implementation plan is accepted and it's made part of the zoning map, it'll then come back to the planning commission for approval of the specific implementation plan and the preliminary plat.
Thank you. Ms. Kupion. Is this the best map you've got so far of the roads and the single-family homes and so forth and so on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I think, as a planning and zoning commission, we're going to have to figure out what are we going to allow as a TND. Is it going to have to be self-sufficient or not? And what is the size that is going to be required or needed for a TND to be self-sufficient? And in my opinion, a TND or this traditional neighborhood development should be self-sufficient. I mean, we just turned down a planned urban development with 928 homes planned on that development. So did the parish council. And now we want to put 1,500 homes on the same property. How is that a better plan? And these 1,500 residences with more than one person living in each, possibly more than one car in each. How is the density better than what was planned with the planned urban development? How is the drainage better than the PUD? I see this as worse density, worse drainage, worse safety. You're going to have more people in a tight area, and the traffic is going to be even worse. So unless it's actually self-sufficient, it's not better. It's worse. If you can't keep these people on this property, and it's just not big enough to keep to put everything that's needed to keep everybody on the property. It's just too small of a piece of property to actually do a true TND, a traditional neighborhood development, where you want people to stay on the property and knock off. If 1,500 residences and people, more people than that, come out onto Highway 190, it's going to be a traffic nightmare. You already have traffic backed up at all the red lights in that area. They'll probably back up in front of this development from one of the major red lights down the street. And then the green space of a TND, the required green space of a TND is actually less. It's 20%. And a PUD is 25%. So the green space requirements on this property are actually lower than the green space that was required on the PUD. So I don't see how this is a better proposition than the previous PUD. The PUD was turned down it was turned down by both the commission and the council. At this point, unless they can figure out a way to make it a traditional TND, which I don't think you can, and as the gentleman stated, you probably need 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 acres to actually do a traditional TND. It's just not, you can't even call it a TND in my opinion. But that's all I've got.
Okay, we've heard from all of our commissioners, and I had set the closing time for this meeting at 8 o'clock. It's a little bit after 8 now. We still...
Mr. Chairman, may I interrupt for 1 second? We have really heard a long dissertation from multiple representatives of the developer. Is it possible to give me a short rebuttal on some of the things that they said?
Lee, at this point in time, I want to tell you no. Okay?
They really have had the lion's share of the microphone, no question.
No, they didn't, okay? Because when I laid the time out, I wanted to be sure that the people had adequate time. And there was adequate time in the so this is the beginning, and I'm glad to see the public out, because there's too many times when we, the commission, see something like this going on, and we have 2 or 3 people from the community, okay? And I know some of you, and I know that the next meeting we have, we'll have a house full, okay? So, you know, this is the beginning, and that's all it is. This is the beginning. And whatever Horton and Meta come back with, that doesn't mean that that's going to be the what's going to go forward. Because we, the commission, will have to look at it, and Nell had some comments, and I'm going to ask her to probably put a lot of her notes in writing and get it to Jeff, get it to me, so that we can get some of her comments either integrated into this plan or explain to her why it can't be integrated into this plan. Okay? So, with all that said, this is supposed to come up on our August the 2nd zoning commission, okay? And the reason, I see a gentleman shaking his head, we have to have it on the agenda because it was postponed to the August 2nd meeting, okay? That doesn't mean that we won't postpone it again. And I think I heard Mr. Shane say that he's looking at maybe a September. Okay? So when it comes to that August 2nd meeting, staff will tell me that they've had a discussion with Mr. Shane and Meta to postpone it, that they're still working on a lot of the points that we have heard tonight from the public. And I appreciate everyone coming. It's 8:12. Thank you.
All right.
Good job.